Hey my loves, it's Ty, back for another response to the tag Top Tarot Trumps that was started by Musings by Marsha. The one that we're up to today is the Hierophant, or the Hierophant, depending how you say it. I'm never sure which one's correct. Or the Pope, if that's what it is in your decks. A few people have talked about struggling with this particular card, and I definitely see why. But compared especially to the Emperor, I actually really like the Hierophant. So a lot of people have mentioned in their replies to this particular tag that they're associating the Hierophant more with a teacher rather than with its like religious component, which I think is an interesting way of doing that and which I definitely relate to. But something that I've been thinking of recently, I have gone back to study lately. I've gone back to university, and so this card is becoming quite relevant for me in my own life at this time. So I've been thinking it's not just a teacher, but it could really represent the act of learning. So if you just humor me for a second, if you can consider the Fool and the Magician, cards 0 and 1, they can kind of represent infancy and being a very small child. So if you think about an infant or a very small child, they're not deferring to anybody else before making their decision. Like, infants only know be loud, poop, sleep. Like, they don't ask for anyone's permission to do that stuff. They don't think about how anyone else is going to feel about it. They just do it. They're just using their own innate knowledges. And so then they're kind of like living in a state of nature almost. And then you get to the next two cards, which are the Empress and the Emperor, and that can kind of represent the parental figures, you know, the mother, the father, or that stage in our development where we don't understand that adults can lie or be wrong. So, you know, there's a certain age where as a child you take the word of your parents as basically absolute gospel. You're unquestioning, you're asking for permission for everything. If you're told something's wrong, you just believe that it's wrong. You just accept everything that they say. Same thing for very small children and like their teachers or any other caregiver. And then you have card 5. So for me, card 5, the Hierophant, is not just about the teacher, it's the next step in our process of learning, which is understanding that we need to analyze and synthesize the information we receive. So in the Hierophant, we have, yes, the Pope or the priest that's in the center of the card, but we also have the two like acolytes or students, which is what this card really represents to me. It's this idea that it's not just about the man in the center of the card, it's about the people in front and what they're doing. So when we learn from a person, whether it's a priest or a lecturer or a newscaster, wherever we're getting information from, we're admitting to ourselves that they know something that we don't. So we kind of have to humble ourselves and shut up and listen for a minute, which is what those two figures in the front of this card are doing. But then we also learn that no source of information is infallible. So as we move into adulthood, we learn that we can take in knowledge, but we have to assess for ourselves whether it's valid or it's useful to us. So we learn that sometimes people do lie, or people deceive or manipulate or deliberately spread misinformation. So this Hierophant could be like the wisest person that you've ever met, a person who's an expert in their field, a person who's at the top of their organization, a person who has lots for you to learn and grow from, or they could be a complete snake oil salesman. As we get older, as we get wiser, we have to learn to discern one from the other. And maybe the hardest lesson of all is that a lot of people are probably a little bit of both. So it was kind of hard for me to choose my 5 examples because in most decks I actually quite like the Hierophant card, but I have chosen 5 and I will turn you around now and show you. We're going to begin with card 5 from the Transient Light Tarot. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that this particular deck renames a lot of the cards in it, especially in the Major Arcana. So this particular one has been renamed to the Proclaimer. I like that it's got a little elephant on there. And the other thing about this particular deck as well is that each of the mages have a poem that accompanies them. So I'm going to read the poem that accompanies this one. which says, "You don't always have to be your own guiding light. There are pathways to teachers that await. You cannot refuse lessons that are meant to challenge and stimulate. Be steadfast like the elephant's pilgrimage to their ancestors' graves. Use a discerning eye, weather the cause and effect, preparing for Operation Upgrade." So the blurb on the other page in this particular guidebook as well says, "We all need parents, mentors, teachers, or authorities to hold our hand and show us the ropes sometimes. Proclaimers have the potential to prepare and educate us, but there's a fine line between a healthy mentor and a dictator. Conviction is powerful, but worthless if unchallenged. If you need guidance, perhaps it's a good time to seek healthy mentors or consider your elders or ancestors. Listen like a child, but form your wisdom like a free-thinking adult." So that really got the wheels turning in my head in terms of, this card representing the sort of not only taking in of information and knowledge, but also the evaluation of that information and knowledge. And this card also has many of the same elements. I nearly said elephants because you see why. Many of the same elements as the traditional Hierophant. You've got the keys, a book, pillars. Again, I quite like the art style in this one. The muted color palette is really nice. A lot of the time, many of the decks that I work with are quite bright. So it's nice to have ones that are in a more subtle tone palette sometimes. Yes, I care about how my layout look aesthetically. Yes, I care about how my spreads look aesthetically. Next up, we have kind of a 2-for-1, because you can see how similar these two cards are. This one on the left is from the 8 Coins Tattoo Tarot. One on the right is from the Wild Unknown Tarot, and it's from the Pocket Edition. That's why it's so little. But you can see we have a raven or a crow. I like to think of it as a raven holding a key. As always, the key is representing knowledge, as it is in every basically example of this card. And this one on the left is just sort of a more detailed example of a similar idea. So we have the raven, which represents knowledge. It does in a lot of different kind of traditions and folklores. The raven is, of course, a very intelligent animal and has often been associated with either divine messages or mischief, or depending what sort of background you're looking at, but it's definitely one of the animals that's associated with wisdom. In this example, it's looking left and right, which symbolizes seeing the past and the future. So we've got holding the key and also the ankh, and then we've also got this big scarab beetle, which represents the changing of the sun and the cycle, which is a major component of the gaining of wisdom. So this artist has emphasized that wisdom is something that grows in time, but instead of illustrating that by using, an elder figure, they've used the example of the turning of the sun, which I really like. And of course, I like the art style on both of these. You can see in both of these decks as well, I've colored the edge. In the major arcanas, I usually color it black because I am spooky, I guess. Next up, we have this one from the Animal Totem Tarot, and completely opposite of what I said just before. This is so bright and so gorgeous. So we have that Aurora Borealis in the background. We have the keys once again. And the book for this one talks about how much of the polar bear's knowledge is to do with its attachment to its land. So the seasonal changes, or the way that the polar bear's natural environment is being impacted by, human impacts, and how the polar bear has to rely on its natural innate knowledge in order to survive, pretty much. So it's talking about the bear's library, it says, is their environment, and I really like that analogy. So it's like another look at what wisdom is. Wisdom doesn't always have to be passed down by a human person. We can also do this process of sitting and listening and engaging with nature, or place, and we can gain our wisdom that way. And I think that's just really, really beautiful. And I think it's beautiful to show that that is a form of knowledge. So finally we have this one from the Cosmic Tarot. And this is a deck that I only got recently. And I'm quite enjoying going through it and using it, getting to know it. It's a really fine line for me sometimes with artwork, whether I find it pretty versus whether I find it useful. I'm a little bit particular about things like the way that faces are drawn and that sort of thing, and it can put me off at times, which this deck, it kind of walks the line of. You can see that there's some proportion things and stuff that are perhaps not ideal, but I'm really fascinated by the content of this artwork to the extent that I just had to get this deck. So what I like about this card is you have this Pope or priest type of figure in the center receiving messages through this kind of beam of light and also through that card that they're holding. And then you have people gathered around who could be clergy or who could be people from any part of the community to listen and to be administered to with that wisdom. And the guidebook for this one says things like tradition and the usual kind of meanings for the Hierophant, but it also mentions terms like false guru and deception. So the idea is no one else knows for sure what this priest or pope is seeing. So he could be relaying that information truthfully and helping to share that wisdom and helping to bring everyone in the community up to a similar level of enlightenment. Or he could be lying and manipulating that wisdom and only sharing what is convenient for himself. So he's the only one that's seeing that light, and everyone else has to know that they can take his word for it. Which I think is just a really fascinating, again, way of depicting this card that goes a little bit beyond just religious leader. It shows the need for discernment in terms of where we get our information from and who we trust. So that has been my top 5 favorite Hierophant cards. Thank you again to Marsha at Musings by Marsha for starting the Top Tarot Trumps tag. It's been really wonderful to see the kind of mutual attitudes that a lot of people have to some of these cards, especially the Emperor and the Hierophant. I find that a lot of people, especially people from communities and intersections that are similar to my own, a lot of queer people, a lot of people who exist in various margins, have some difficulty with those cards and have different ways of conceiving of them. And so it's been really nice to learn from all of those people about their different views on this card and on the different cards. If you enjoyed this one, please do leave us a like, chuck us a subscribe, and otherwise I will see you in the next one. Okay, be nice. Bye.